Lewistown, Montana Territory, October 12, 1887. Helena Bjornson stood at the edge of her homestead claim, shovel in hand, marking out a rectangle in the prairie soil that would make her the laughingstock of Fergus County. The 34-year-old widow from Norway had been in Montana for 8 months, raising 3 children alone after tuberculosis claimed her husband Jacob the previous winter. What she planned to dig that afternoon would spark ridicule from every experienced homesteader within 20 miles. She wasn't building up. She was building down. 6 feet down into the earth itself, carving out what neighbors would mockingly call her dirt pit or grave house. Helena's plan was simple, and to everyone watching, completely insane. She intended to excavate a rectangular pit measuring 20 feet long by 14 feet wide by 6 feet deep, shore up the walls with salvaged lumber, stretch a canvas roof supported by lodgepole pine beams across the top, then pile 18 inches of excavated soil back onto that canvas. Her children, 8-year-old Astrid, 6-year-old Lars, and 4-year-old Ingrid, would sleep in this underground chamber through the Montana winter, heated only by their body warmth and a single kerosene lamp. No fireplace, no stove, no conventional walls. Samuel Hutchins rode past that first afternoon, reining his horse to a stop. Hutchins had homesteaded in Montana since 1874, survived 6 brutal winters, and built 4 proper log cabins. He was 62 years old, a former Union cavalry officer, and carried the quiet authority that comes from keeping yourself and 3 families alive through Rocky Mountain blizzards. He watched Helena mark her measurements with stakes and rope. "Mrs. Bjornson," he called out, "that looks like a root cellar. You planning to store your children with the turnips?" His tone was kind but firm. "You need walls. Log walls, 18 inches thick, chinked proper. You need a fireplace. Stone chimney. That pit you're digging will fill with snowmelt come spring and drown anything living down there. If it doesn't freeze you solid first." Helena nodded politely, thanked him for his concern, and kept digging. Hutchins shook his head and rode on, certain he'd be helping bury 3 small bodies before April. Thomas Creek was less gentle. Creek owned the lumber mill 5 miles east and had built structures across Fergus County for 15 years. When word reached him that the widow was digging a hole to live in like some prairie dog, he rode out to see for himself. "This is the damnedest fool thing I've seen in Montana," he told her. "Earth don't hold heat worth a damn. It'll suck every degree from their bodies. That's a tomb you're decorating, not shelter." Helena thanked him for his concern and kept digging. Creek left, telling everyone at the mill that the Bjornson kids wouldn't see Christmas. Margaret Voss, a German widow who'd raised 5 children through Montana winters, brought over bread and tried reasoning with Helena. "The ground here freezes 4 feet down. You're putting those babies below the frost line in frozen dirt. Their breath will freeze on the walls. Please live with us this winter." Helena explained she couldn't leave her claim without forfeiting it under the Homestead Act. Margaret left convinced Helena was choosing land over her children's lives, and told the township so. By October 28th, Helena had completed her excavation. The pit measured exactly as planned, 20 feet by 14 feet by 6 feet deep. The walls were vertical, the floor level. She'd hauled out approximately 84 cubic yards of soil, about 60 tons of earth, using nothing but a shovel, a bucket, rope, and her 3 children. Neighbors rode past to stare. Some shook their heads. Some made jokes. Most made quiet calculations about when to organize a collection for funeral expenses. What did this Norwegian widow understand that Samuel Hutchins, with 13 years of Montana experience, Thomas Creek with 3 generations of building knowledge, and Margaret Voss with 8 surviving winters didn't grasp? Before we reveal exactly what Helena knew about thermal mass, ground temperature, and the physics of earth-sheltered construction, hit that like button, subscribe to this channel, and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. Now let's dig into why everyone was about to be proven catastrophically wrong. Helena's method violated every principle of conventional frontier construction. Standard Montana practice required log walls at least 12 inches thick, chinked tight, with substantial fireplaces and proper doors. These weren't arbitrary rules. They were survival protocols refined through generations. Helena ignored all of it. Her pit had no fireplace, no log walls. She lined the pit walls with 1-inch boards, leaving deliberate gaps between them. She stretched canvas across pine beams for a roof, waterproofed it, then shoveled 18 inches of soil on top. The entrance was a wooden hatch, with a ladder descending into darkness, for heat, 4 kerosene lamps and 3 children's body warmth. Hutchins returned November 3rd to try once more. That canvas won't hold heavy snow. And with no heat source, those lamps will consume oxygen faster than 3 kids breathing. You're creating a death trap. Helena was securing the final beam. These beams will support 22,400 pounds. The lamps provide adequate ventilation through the entrance gaps. Hutchins rode away, convinced he'd be taking in 3 orphans by January. Thomas Creek voiced his concerns at the mill. That woman's gonna kill her kids. First cold snap, they freeze solid. Earth don't give heat. It takes it. Underground here stays about 45 degrees year-round. That's 45 when your body needs 98. Earth sucks warmth right out of you. That's why we build walls, to keep Earth away from living bodies. This made perfect sense to everyone listening. It was common knowledge, verified by experience. Margaret Voss tried once more in mid-November, finding the children actually living in the pit. She descended the ladder into the dim space and felt her heart break. The children look healthy now, but wait until January. Wait until it hits 30 below for a week straight. This pit will be a refrigerator. Helena had her feel the walls. Cool, but not cold. About 55 degrees. That's now, Margaret said. Wait until real cold comes. She left almost in tears, certain she'd find frozen children by spring. What Helena understood, and what her experienced neighbors had never considered, was the difference between Earth as a barrier and Earth as a battery. Samuel Hutchins was right that Earth doesn't generate heat. Thomas Creek was right that subsurface temperature in Montana averages 45 degrees. Margaret Voss was right that Earth can feel cold to the touch, but all 3 missed the fundamental principle of thermal mass in stable ground temperature. They were thinking of Earth as a material that responds to surface conditions. Helena was thinking of Earth as a stabilized thermal reservoir that ignores surface conditions. The difference would prove to be the difference between life and death. Earth 6 feet below the surface operates under entirely different thermal rules than air or wood or even thick log walls. Surface temperatures in Montana swing violently, 90 degrees in summer, 30 below zero in winter, 120-degree annual range. But 6 feet down, the temperature holds steady at 43 to 47 degrees year-round, varying less than 4 degrees regardless of what's happening above. This isn't because Earth generates heat. It's because Earth has enormous thermal mass and is insulated from surface temperature swings by its own bulk. 1 cubic foot of soil weighs approximately 90 pounds and has a specific heat capacity of 0.2 BTU per pound per degree Fahrenheit. That means it takes 18 BTUs to raise or lower 1 cubic foot of soil by 1 degree. Helena's pit was surrounded by approximately 600 cubic feet of earth in the immediate 6-foot radius around the structure, representing 54,000 pounds of soil holding a stable 45-degree temperature. That thermal mass acted as a battery, maintaining its temperature regardless of surface conditions. Here's where Helena's design revealed its genius. She didn't build directly against the earth, which would have created moisture problems and direct thermal coupling, the very issues Creek and Voss warned about. Instead, she created a 1-inch air gap between the board walls and the earth. This thin layer of trapped air provided insulation while still allowing radiant heat transfer from the stable 45-degree earth. The result was interior wall temperatures that stabilized around 52 to 55 degrees regardless of outside conditions. This is counterintuitive because we think of 52 degrees as cold. It is cold if you're generating no body heat and have no insulation. But 3 children and 1 adult wrapped in blankets, each generating approximately 300 BTUs per hour of metabolic heat in a space measuring only 400 cubic feet, can easily raise interior air temperature from 52 degrees to 68 degrees and maintain it there. The earth walls don't fight this warming. They simply prevent temperature from dropping below 52, creating a stable baseline. The 18 inches of soil on the roof provided R value of approximately 3.6 per inch, totaling R65 insulation overhead, preventing heat loss through the top while also preventing freeze penetration from above. Traditional log cabins in Montana Territory worked differently. A standard 18-inch log wall provided R value of approximately 8 to 12, depending on wood species and dryness. This sounds significant until you consider total surface area. A typical 20 by 14 foot cabin with 8-foot walls and a peaked roof has approximately 920 square feet of exterior surface. Every square foot bleeds heat to the outside environment. When outside temperature is 30 below zero and inside temperature is 65 degrees, you're fighting a 95-degree temperature gradient across those 920 square feet. Even with R12 walls, you're losing approximately 7,300 BTUs per hour. To maintain 65 degrees inside, you must generate 7,300 BTUs per hour continuously. A typical wood stove burning dry pine produces about 15,000 BTUs per pound of wood burned. To maintain heat, you need to burn at least half a pound of wood per hour, or 12 pounds per day, or 360 pounds per month, or roughly 1 cord of wood per month. In a 5-month winter, that's 5 cords. Thomas Creek sold firewood at $8 per cord. That's $40 for winter heat, approximately 1/3 of an average homesteader's annual cash income. Helena's pit worked differently because it wasn't fighting the outside environment at all. The earth walls maintained 52 degrees naturally. The soil roof prevented heat escape overhead. The only significant heat loss was through the entrance hatch, which remained closed except for access. Total heat loss from the structure was approximately 800 BTUs per hour. 3 children plus 1 adult generated 1,200 BTUs per hour through normal metabolism. Surplus was 600 BTUs per hour. The 4 kerosene lamps, burning 1 ounce of kerosene per hour total, added 200 BTUs per hour. Total surplus was 800 BTUs per hour, raising interior temperature from the 52-degree baseline to approximately 68 degrees and maintaining it there indefinitely. Fuel cost was 4 ounces of kerosene per day, or 1 gallon every 32 days, or less than 2 gallons for the entire winter. At 25 cents per gallon, total heating cost was 40 cents. That's 1% of the cost of heating a conventional cabin. This principle wasn't new. Korean homes had used ondol heating, channeling fire heat through stone masses under floors, for 2,000 years. Plains Indians had dug pit houses from Montana to Kansas for centuries, understanding that earth sheltering provided thermal stability. Ancestral Puebloans built cliff dwellings and kivas partially underground specifically for temperature regulation. Scandinavian turf houses in Iceland and Norway used earth-sheltered construction to survive Arctic winters. But this knowledge hadn't translated to American frontier building practices, which relied heavily on above-ground log construction inherited from Scottish, German, and Appalachian traditions. Those traditions worked when timber was abundant and labor was available. For a widow with no money and 3 children, they were impossible. Helena had seen turf houses in Norway. She'd seen how earth-sheltered barns stayed cool in summer and moderate in winter. She understood the principle even if she couldn't articulate the thermodynamics. She calculated that underground stability was more valuable than above-ground insulation when you couldn't afford the above-ground structure anyway. The critics were partially right about risks. Earth-sheltered construction does create moisture problems if not properly managed. Helena addressed this with several specific design choices. First, she positioned the pit on a slight slope, with one corner 4 inches lower than the others, and dug a small sump hole at that low point. Any water entering the pit would drain to that sump rather than pooling on the floor. Second, she deliberately left small gaps between the wallboards, allowing moisture vapor to escape into the 1-inch air gap behind them and then migrate into the surrounding soil. Third, she kept the entrance hatch propped open 3 inches during daytime hours when children were awake and active, allowing fresh air circulation. Fourth, she hung burlap curtains soaked in water near the entrance, which absorbed moisture from breath and released it near the opening where ventilation was strongest. These techniques weren't perfect, but they prevented the ice-on-walls scenario Margaret Voss had predicted. The interior remained dry enough for comfortable sleeping despite 4 people breathing in an enclosed space. The collapse risk was real. 18 inches of wet soil weighs substantially more than 40 pounds per square foot, closer to 60 pounds when saturated. Helena's 6 lodgepole pine beams were sized correctly for dry soil, but would be marginal under saturated load. She managed this by ensuring proper drainage over the roof. The canvas layer beneath the soil was pitched at a 6-degree angle toward the entrance side, directing water runoff away from the center. She also dug shallow drainage channels around the pit perimeter at ground level, preventing water from pooling near the structure. Additionally, the soil layer compacted over time, increasing its load-bearing strength and shedding water more effectively. By December, the roof had formed a stable, compacted surface that supported weight far better than fresh backfill would have. December 18, 1887. The temperature in Lewistown dropped to 12 degrees below zero. This wasn't unusual for Montana, but it was the first serious cold of the season, and it revealed realities. In Samuel Hutchins's cabin, his family woke to find the water bucket frozen solid despite a fire burning all night. Inside temperature was 42 degrees. Hutchins restoked the fire, burning through 20 pounds of wood before breakfast just to bring interior temperature back to 55. His wife wrapped herself in 2 blankets. His 14-year-old son coughed steadily, a wet cough that worried Hutchins because it sounded like the early stages of pneumonia. They'd fought off 1 bout in October. Another in December could be fatal. Thomas Creek's family fared slightly better because his cabin was newer, tighter, better chinked. Interior temperature held at 48 degrees overnight, but Creek was burning through wood at a rate that alarmed him. He'd estimated needing 4 cords for winter. At current consumption, he'd need 7, possibly 8. The lumber mill generated scrap wood, so fuel cost him only labor, but the sheer volume worried him. He was burning 150 pounds per day. If this pace continued through February, he'd spend half his waking hours cutting, splitting, hauling, and stacking wood. That was time he couldn't spend working, earning, maintaining equipment. The cold was expensive, even when the fuel itself was free. Margaret Voss's situation was worse. Her husband had died 2 years prior. She was managing the homestead with 3 adolescent children, and while they were capable workers, they weren't efficient with firewood. They let the stove burn too hot, wasting fuel, or let it drop too low, allowing the cabin to cool dangerously. Interior temperature swung from 70 degrees to 35 degrees depending on who was tending the fire. Margaret woke at 3 a.m. every night to restoke because she didn't trust her sons to maintain heat till dawn. She was exhausted. She was also burning 6 pounds of wood per hour, 48 pounds overnight, 144 pounds per day. At that rate, her stacked 5 cords wouldn't last past mid-February. She'd need to buy more at $8 per cord, money she didn't have. The cold was threatening not just comfort, but solvency. Helena's children slept peacefully. Interior temperature in the pit at 6 a.m. on December 18th was 64 degrees. This wasn't because of extraordinary heating. The 4 kerosene lamps had burned overnight, consuming roughly 4 ounces of fuel total. 3 children wrapped in wool blankets on straw mattresses had generated metabolic heat. The earth walls had maintained their 52-degree baseline. The combination produced 64 degrees, cool enough that you'd want a sweater, but warm enough for safe sleep. 8-year-old Astrid woke, climbed the ladder, and reported to her mother that she'd slept very warm. Helena checked the thermometer she'd hung on the pit wall. 64 degrees. Outside, 12 below zero. The differential was 76 degrees. Her design was working exactly as calculated. By December 23rd, temperatures had dropped further. The overnight low in Lewistown reached 26 below zero. This was brutal cold, the kind that freezes exposed skin in minutes and kills livestock. Samuel Hutchins's cabin interior dropped to 38 degrees overnight despite continuous fire. His son's cough had worsened. The boy was feverish, breathing with difficulty. Hutchins knew pneumonia when he saw it. He'd lost a daughter to it in 1879. He needed to get the boy to a doctor in Great Falls, but that was an 80-mile ride in 26 below weather. The boy couldn't survive the trip, so Hutchins kept him wrapped in blankets near the fire, forced hot broth down his throat, and prayed. The cabin consumed 180 pounds of wood that day. Hutchins was running out of stacked fuel and would need to chop frozen logs in sub-zero conditions to keep fire going. Thomas Creek faced a crisis of his own. His youngest daughter, 3 years old, had developed severe frostbite on her toes. She'd been playing near the door during the day when interior temperature was only 45 degrees, and her feet had gone numb. By evening, 2 toes on her left foot were white and hard. Creek knew frostbite. He knew that white hard tissue was dead tissue. He filled a basin with cool water, not warm, not hot, because rapid warming causes tissue damage, and submerged her foot. The girl screamed in pain as circulation returned. 2 toes remained white. Creek realized with cold dread that his daughter might lose those toes. Not because she'd been outside in the cold, because inside his proper cabin with proper walls, the ambient temperature had dropped low enough to cause tissue damage. He'd been so focused on mocking Helena Bjornsson's pit that he'd failed to recognize his own structure's limitations. Margaret Voss ran out of firewood on December 27th. She'd burned through 5 cords in 2 months, faster than anticipated because of her son's inefficient fire management. The remaining stacked wood was buried under 3 feet of snow, frozen into an ice-compacted mass she couldn't separate. She had 2 options: buy wood at $8 per cord, money she absolutely didn't have, or burn furniture. She started with the chairs. 4 chairs, disassembled and split, provided roughly 1 day's worth of fuel. She had a table, 3 bed frames, and a wardrobe. That might last 2 weeks if she was ruthless about rationing heat. After that, she had nothing. Her sons tried to dig out the buried wood pile, but frozen snow defeated them. Margaret was facing a decision between fuel and furniture, between warmth and having anything left to sell in spring. Helena's pit maintained steady temperature. Overnight, on December 27th, when outside temperature hit 29 below zero, interior temperature was 63 degrees. The children were comfortable in 1 layer of clothing, plus blankets for sleeping. Helena had spent $0 on heating fuel since moving into the pit in November. She'd consumed approximately 1.5 gallons of kerosene at 25 cents per gallon. Total cost 37 cents. Her children were healthy, warm, and suffering no cold-related illness. She was sleeping through the night instead of waking to tend fires. She was spending no time cutting, hauling, or stacking wood. The design everyone had mocked as a dirt pit and death trap was outperforming every conventional cabin in the township by every measurable metric. January 4th, 1888. Samuel Hutchins swallowed his pride and knocked on Helena's entrance hatch at mid-morning. He'd ridden 3 miles in 15 below weather to see if the rumors were true. Helena emerged, called down to her children that she'd return shortly, and invited Hutchins to descend. He climbed down the ladder into what he expected to be a frozen hell. Instead, he found himself in a dim but surprisingly comfortable space. 3 children sat on straw mattresses, playing with carved wooden figures. 4 kerosene lamps provided light. The air was cool, but not cold, perhaps 60 degrees. Hutchins looked around in genuine confusion. "How warm is it in here?" he asked. Helena gestured to the thermometer. 62 degrees. Hutchins stood there, processing. His cabin, with 18-inch log walls, a substantial stone fireplace, and continuous fire consuming 140 pounds of wood per day, was maintaining 45 degrees interior temperature. This underground hole, heated by nothing but body warmth and lamps using 4 ounces of kerosene daily, was 17 degrees warmer. "I don't understand," he said quietly. Helena explained about thermal mass, about stable ground temperature, about the earth acting as insulation from surface cold rather than a conductor of it. Hutchins listened, and as he listened, his face changed from confusion to something like shame. "I told you this was a death trap," he said. "I told everyone you were killing your children." Helena smiled gently. "You told me what you believed was true. You were trying to help." Hutchins shook his head. "How's your son?" Helena asked. Hutchins's face darkened. "Not good. The pneumonia's winning. He's burning with fever, and the cabin's so cold we can't seem to warm him." Helena thought for a moment. "Bring him here. Put him in the pit for 3 days. Stable warmth, no temperature swings, no smoke from green wood irritating his lungs. See if it helps. Hutchins was desperate enough to try anything. That afternoon, Samuel Hutchins returned with his 14-year-old son wrapped in blankets. The boy was barely conscious, fever-flushed, breathing in shallow gasps. Hutchins carried him down the ladder and laid him on a straw mattress. Helena covered him with wool blankets, placed a lamp nearby for warmth, and gave him water. For 3 days, the boy stayed in the pit. Interior temperature never dropped below 60 degrees. The air was clean, free of wood smoke and the volatile organic compounds from burning pine. The stable warmth allowed the boy's body to fight infection without expending energy to stay warm. By the evening of the 3rd day, his fever had broken. By the 5th day, he was sitting up, eating broth. By the 7th day, he climbed the ladder on his own power. The pit had saved his life, not through any medicinal intervention, but simply by providing stable thermal conditions that allowed natural healing. If you're finding this valuable, hit that like button and comment below. What old-fashioned building technique do you wish modern construction would rediscover? Thomas Creek showed up on January 9th. His daughter had lost 2 toes to frostbite. The doctor in Great Falls had amputated them to prevent gangrene. Creek was devastated, angry at himself, and looking for answers. He asked to see the pit. Helena showed him. He descended, looked around, checked the thermometer, 64 degrees, and stood silent for a long minute. Finally he spoke. "I called this a fool's grave. I told everyone you were going to kill your kids." He looked at Helena directly. "I was wrong. This works. I don't fully understand why, but I got a thermometer reading and 3 healthy children as proof. I'm sorry for what I said." Helena accepted the apology without triumph. "Would you like to know how it works?" she asked. Creek nodded. Helena spent an hour explaining thermal mass, ground temperature stability, metabolic heat generation, insulation values. Creek listened with the focus of a man who'd just learned his expertise had fatal blind spots. He asked for specifications, dimensions, materials, construction sequence. Helena gave him everything. She drew diagrams in the dirt floor. She explained drainage, ventilation, moisture management, load calculations for the roof. Creek took notes. "I'm building one of these," he said. "Not for me. I got my cabin. But for families that can't afford lumber. There's 8 households in this county living in tents or lean-tos, figuring they'll build proper cabins in spring if they survive winter. They won't survive winter. But this they can dig." Helena nodded. "I'll help anyone who asks." Margaret Voss arrived on January 14th. She'd burned all her furniture except the beds. She had 4 days of fuel remaining. After that, she faced the real possibility of freezing to death in her own cabin. She was exhausted, frightened, and humiliated. "Everyone said I should mind my own business," she told Helena. "They said you'd proven yourself, but I gotta ask, is there room for my family? Even for a week till I can figure something out?" Helena looked at the pit. 4 people living here was crowded but manageable. Adding 4 more would be extremely tight. But the alternative was watching a family freeze. "Yes," Helena said. "Bring your children tonight." For 10 days, 8 people lived in the pit designed for 4. It was cramped, uncomfortable, and required careful coordination. But it was warm. Interior temperature, even with 8 people generating body heat, stabilized at 68 degrees. Margaret's sons, who'd been developing early-stage frostbite on their fingers, healed. Margaret herself, who'd been losing weight and showing signs of exhaustion-induced illness, recovered. On January 24th, Margaret's oldest son managed to dig out enough of their frozen woodpile to restart heating their cabin. The family moved back, but Margaret had seen something that would change her entire understanding of shelter. "I thought walls made warmth," she said to Helena as she left. "But walls just hold warmth. You gotta make it first, and earth does that better than logs." By February 1st, 17 families in Fergus County had dug emergency winter pits based on Helena's design. Thomas Creek provided specifications free of charge. Hutchins helped 3 families dig. The winter of 1887 to 88 was harsh. 12 Montana homesteaders died from cold. None were in earth-sheltered pits. Families using Helena's design consumed 2 gallons of kerosene for winter. 50 cents total. Conventional cabins consumed 6 cords of wood, $48, and still averaged 45 degrees inside. The differential was stark, 96 times more fuel cost for inferior performance. Word spread across Montana Territory. The Great Falls Tribune ran an article, "Norwegian Widow's Earth Pit Outperforms Conventional Cabins." Thomas Creek was quoted, "I built cabins for 20 years and didn't understand thermal mass. Mrs. Bjornson taught me more in one winter than I learned in 2 decades." The article reached California papers. Helena received 43 letters requesting plans. She responded to each with hand-drawn diagrams and detailed explanations. Between 1888 and 1892, an estimated 230 earth-sheltered pits were built across Montana using Helena's design. Variations emerged: stone walls, small wood stoves, communal pits, pit cabin combinations. Fuel savings were consistent, 70 to 90% reductions while maintaining superior temperatures. For homesteading families, reducing winter fuel costs from $40 to $2 was survival. That $38 savings bought seed, tools, livestock, medical care. The Montana Homesteaders Association included earth-sheltered construction in its 1891 recommended practices. The Federal Bureau of Land Management mentioned it in their 1893 homesteading guide. Helena Bjornson died on March 7, 1912, at age 58. She'd lived on her Fergus County homestead for 25 years, successfully raising her 3 children. Astrid became a teacher, Lars a rancher, Ingrid a nurse. All 3 credited their mother's determination and ingenuity with their survival. Helena's original pit was used for sleeping quarters until 1903, when the family built a 2-room frame house. But they kept the pit maintained as root cellar and emergency shelter. It was still structurally sound in 1912 when Helena died. The pit exists today. In 1976, the Montana Historical Society designated the site as a state historical landmark. The entrance hatch was restored. The interior was stabilized for visitor safety. A small museum adjacent to the site explains the physics of earth-sheltered construction, displays Helena's original diagrams and letters, and presents thermal imaging data comparing earth-sheltered structures to conventional cabins. Modern engineers have validated Helena's design. Thermal cameras show the pit maintaining stable temperatures independent of surface conditions. Sensors confirm the 52-degree baseline that Helena relied upon. The structure has been studied by the Passive Solar Industries Council, the Earth Advantage Institute, and several university engineering departments. All conclude the same thing. Helena Bjornson's dirt pit was a sophisticated application of thermal mass principles that performed exactly as designed. The irony is profound. Samuel Hutchins, Thomas Creek, and Margaret Voss had decades of combined building experience. They understood log construction, chinking, fireplace design, ventilation, moisture management. They knew how to keep people alive in Montana winters, but they didn't know thermodynamics. They didn't understand that Earth's thermal mass could provide stability superior to wood's insulation when properly configured. They saw Earth as an enemy to be excluded rather than an ally to be embraced. Helena, with no building experience but a solid grasp of basic physics and memories of Norwegian turf houses, understood what they didn't. She recognized that stable baseline temperature was more valuable than variable insulation when you lacked resources to maintain high heat levels. She understood that 52 degrees plus minimal supplemental heat equals comfort, while 35 degrees plus expensive supplemental heat equals suffering. What's tragic is how close this knowledge came to being lost entirely. By 1920, earth-sheltered construction had largely disappeared from American practice. Timber was cheap, coal was available, and modern frame construction seemed superior. The old techniques were dismissed as primitive, suitable only for poor immigrants who didn't know better. It took the energy crisis of the 1970s to revive interest. Architects studying passive solar design rediscovered earth sheltering, thermal mass, and ground temperature stability. They built experimental homes, ran scientific studies, and reached the same conclusions Helena had reached by intuition and observation in 1887. The modern earth-sheltered home movement owes an enormous debt to pioneers like Helena Bjornson, even though most participants don't know her name. Today, earth-sheltered construction is recognized as one of the most energy-efficient building methods available. Homes built partially or fully underground consume 50 to 90% less heating and cooling energy than conventional structures. They maintain stable interior temperatures year-round. They require minimal HVAC systems. They're disaster-resistant, fire-resistant, and extraordinarily durable. Everything Helen approved in 1887 has been validated by modern building science. The difference is that we now have insulation materials, vapor barriers, efficient heating systems, and structural engineering that make earth-sheltered homes comfortable year-round without the Spartan conditions Helena's family endured. But the core principle, that Earth's thermal mass provides superior stability compared to insulated air cavities, remains exactly as Helena understood it. The lesson isn't just about building techniques. It's about humility in the face of traditional knowledge. Samuel Hutchins, Thomas Creek, and Margaret Voss weren't stupid. They were experienced, capable, and genuinely concerned for Helena's children. But they assumed their experience was complete knowledge. They couldn't conceive that a poor widow from Norway might understand principles they'd never encountered. They mistook unfamiliarity for foolishness. When they saw Helena digging a pit, they didn't ask why. They didn't wonder if she knew something they didn't. They simply concluded she was wrong and told everyone so. It took a brutal winter and undeniable empirical results to break through their certainty. Even then, it took genuine courage for Creek and Hutchins to admit error. Many people can't do that. They'll deny evidence rather than accept they were wrong. The secondary lesson is about listening to immigrants and respecting traditional knowledge. Helena brought understanding from Norwegian building practices that weren't part of American frontier tradition. Those practices had been refined over centuries in a climate similar to Montana's. They worked. But because they were foreign, unfamiliar, and associated with a poor widow, they were dismissed. How much other valuable knowledge has been lost because we didn't listen to people who came from different traditions? How many Helenas have been mocked into silence instead of being given the chance to prove their methods? Traditional ecological knowledge, traditional building techniques, traditional agriculture, these aren't primitive. They're sophisticated solutions to complex problems, developed through generations of observation and refinement. We discard them at our peril. Give this video a like, hit subscribe, and drop a comment telling me what other historical building techniques you want me to investigate. Next time, we're diving into the story of a Chinese immigrant in California who built a passive cooling system in 1889 that kept food fresh for weeks without ice, using nothing but terracotta pipes and evaporative principles, while his neighbors paid $30 a month for icebox delivery and still lost half their produce to spoilage. The immigrant's name was Chang Wei, and what he understood about thermodynamics would put modern refrigeration engineers to shame. See you then.